A little girl, surrounded by wealth, hides a secret sadness her father never notices, until an unexpected maid steps in her lonely world and changes everything. Welcome to Stories Hub. Make sure you like and subscribe for your top-notch stories. I remember the first time I truly noticed her sadness. It was a Monday morning, the kind that smelled like fresh coffee and polished floors. And I had been hired for the Mitchell estate just a week prior. I was a new maid, quiet and careful, blending into the background as I watched the family from the edges of their perfect world. Mr. Mitchell, the billionaire owner of a sprawling property business empire, was a man who never stopped moving. He had meetings stacked one after another, private jets lined up for business trips, and enough money to make anyone dizzy. But for all his wealth and power, he was absent in the one place it mattered most, his daughter. I noticed little Emma Mitchell sitting alone in the grand dining room, her small hands wrapped around a glass of juice, a plate of untouched food in front of her. The room was quiet except for the faint ticking of the golden clock on the wall. Every morning, like clockwork, she ate alone while the staff scurried around, serving meals, attending to Mr. Mitchell's endless demands, and making sure the house ran like a well-oiled machine. No one ever sat with her, and one noticed the way her eyes seemed to follow the clock, as if hoping her father would walk through the door and finally look at her. I had been told before I arrived that children in wealthy families often get spoiled or misbehave, but Emma didn't fit that mold. She was quiet, observant, and carried a sadness far older than her 10 years. I wondered how someone could live surrounded by luxury, yet feel so invisible. One morning, as I was refilling the coffee for the staff, I noticed her struggling to cut the food on her plate. Her tiny fingers trembled, and she pushed the fork away after several failed attempts. It was a small gesture, but it struck something in me. I walked over slowly, careful not to startle her. "Do you want me to help?" I asked softly. She looked up, startled, like she wasn't used to anyone talking to her while she ate. Her lips parted slightly, as if she was going to speak, but didn't know how. Then, with a small nod, she handed me the plate. I sat beside her in the grand chair that barely fit my size, and we started eating together. The first bite she took while I guided her hand was hesitant, but I smiled and encouraged her. Slowly, she began to relax. For the first time, there was laughter in the dining room during breakfast. Not the loud, shallow laughter of parties or staff meetings, but real, quiet laughter, two people sharing a simple moment together. I could see her shoulders loosen and the tension in her small frame melted just a bit. It wasn't long before I realized something strange. Every day, I noticed the same pattern. Emma's father never joined her. He came and went, spoke in clipped sentences, and often left before she even finished a bite. He was a man with 1,000 connections, yet he had none with his own daughter. I felt a sudden, sharp pang of determination. Someone had to fill that gap, and if it was going to be me, I needed to do it carefully. I couldn't force a relationship with her or try to replace her father. I just needed to be there when she had no one else. The next day, I arrived early and prepared her favorite breakfast. She entered the room with a quiet curiosity, her eyes widening at the sight of scrambled eggs, toast, and a small bowl of fruit neatly arranged on the polished dining table. I sat in the same chair as yesterday, and she hesitated for a moment before sitting down. "You remembered," she whispered, a tiny smile flickering across her face. "Yes," I said, "I always remember." Her smile grew just a little, and for a moment, it felt like the walls of the mansion had disappeared. The grandeur didn't matter, the wealth didn't matter, and even the ticking clock faded into silence. There was just Emma and me, and a quiet understanding that someone cared. Yet, even as we ate and laughed softly, I knew the tension wasn't gone. Mr. Mitchell's absence hung over the table like a storm cloud, a reminder that the world she lived in was not meant for her. And somehow, I had to find a way to protect her from the loneliness that no amount of money could fix. Before we dive in deeply, let us know in the comments what country or which city you're watching this story for. We'd love to know how far this story travels. The next morning, I arrived at the Mitchell estate before dawn. The sky was still a soft gray, and the world outside looked quiet and unbothered, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside that mansion. I carried a tray carefully prepared with Emma's breakfast, her favorite oatmeal with slices of banana and a little drizzle of honey. As I entered the kitchen, I caught sight of Mr. Mitchell. He was in his usual morning rush, pacing back and forth with a phone pressed to his ear. His tie was crooked, his hair slightly disheveled, and his expression was one of controlled impatience. I had learned quickly that speaking to him too long without permission would earn a glare sharp enough to cut glass. But he never noticed the little girl who sat alone in the dining room, the daughter he had brought into this world but seemed to forget each morning. I quietly made my way to the dining room, tray in hand. Emma was already there, staring at the empty chair across from her, like she expected someone to appear magically. I set the tray down and sat beside her, just like the day before. "Morning," I whispered, trying to keep the voice soft and reassuring. She looked at me, eyes wide, and for a moment, I could see the loneliness etched deeper than ever. Her small hands clutched the edge of the table, fingers twisting nervously. Did you wake up early just for me?" she asked, almost not daring to believe it. "I did," I said with a smile. "I brought you breakfast." Her lips curved into a small, cautious smile, and I could feel a little piece of the wall around her heart crack. She picked up her spoon and started to eat, slowly, like tasting something unfamiliar yet comforting. I encouraged her quietly, chatting about simple things, about the birds outside, the way the sun looked in the morning, and even a little story about my own messy breakfast the day before. As we ate, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed from the hallway. I tensed, recognizing the rhythm of Mr. Mitchell's boots on the polished floor. I knew he wouldn't notice us unless he wanted to, and he usually didn't. Emma froze, glancing nervously at the door. I placed a comforting hand on hers and whispered, "It's okay. He won't bother us." But just then, the door swung open. Mr. Mitchell stood there, arms crossed, brow furrowed. For a moment, I thought we'd be scolded, but he didn't say a word. He just stared at the two of us, Emma with a spoon halfway to her mouth, and me, trying to look calm. Then, without a single word, he turned and left the room. Emma let out a long, shaky breath, and I smiled reassuringly. "See? Nothing to worry about," I said. Over the next week, this became our routine. Every morning, I would sit with her, encourage her to eat, and fill the silence with conversation. She began to talk a little more, telling me about her school, the friends she didn't have, and the books she loved. I learned that her father had been too busy, too distracted, and perhaps too proud to see the girl sitting all alone in that golden dining room every morning. But not everything was smooth. One morning, I noticed bruises on her arms, faint but visible. She quickly pulled her sleeves down and looked away, avoiding my gaze. My heart clenched. "Emma, what happened?" I asked gently. She shook her head, whispering, I fell." Her voice was tiny, but I didn't believe her. Not entirely. Kids don't usually hide simple accidents this way, unless they are scared of someone seeing them. I kept my expression neutral, didn't push, but made a mental note to pay closer attention. As the days passed, I also noticed how rigid the house was, like it was run by rules no one dared break. The staff moved silently, the rooms were pristine, and yet, beneath it all, there was a tension, an undercurrent of fear or pressure. Emma was trapped in that bubble of wealth and perfection, and no one, not her father, not the staff, noticed the walls closing in on her. One evening, I stayed late after dinner, cleaning the kitchen while Emma sat at the table finishing her homework. I caught her glancing at the empty chair beside her and realized she was waiting for something, someone who never came. My chest tightened that I decided then that I wouldn't let her sit there alone anymore, no matter what happened. Later, while I put away the last dish, a sound behind me made me freeze, a chair scraping against the tile. Emma had moved closer, her small frame leaning in nervously. "Do you think he'll ever sit with me?" she asked quietly, almost afraid to hope. I looked down at her, my heart aching with the truth. "I don't know," I admitted, "but for now, I'll sit with you. Always." And in that moment, the house, the wealth, the emptiness, it all felt a little less cold. But I knew the real challenge had just begun, because even as I comforted her, I could sense that her father's absence was not just a habit. It was a choice, and one that might take everything to undo. The weekend arrived, and with it, a rare silence in the mansion. Most of the staff were off, errands and chores left behind for the first time in weeks. Emma seemed to sense it too. The quiet made her fidget, tapping her fingers on the polished table, glancing at the chair across from her as if hoping it might magically fill. I carried a tray with freshly baked pancakes, their sweet aroma filling the air. Emma's eyes lit up when she saw them. "You made them?" she asked, her voice brighter than I had heard in weeks. "Yes," I said, placing the tray in front of her. "I thought we could have a little breakfast picnic here." She giggled softly, the sound so rare it made my chest tighten. I poured syrup on the pancakes and watched her dig in with both hands, syrup dripping on the table. I pulled a napkin and wiped it up, laughing along with her. It was the first time I had seen her so genuinely carefree. Halfway through breakfast, I heard the unmistakable sound of high heels clicking down the marble hallway. My stomach tightened. Mr. Mitchell, and today it seemed he was accompanied by someone else, his business partner, a man with a sharp suit and an even sharper gaze. "Stay here," I whispered, standing and moving to the doorway, ready to intercept any unwanted attention. But Emma, brave in her own quiet way, didn't move. She stared at me with a determined look. I nodded once, signaling that it was okay, and returned to the kitchen. Mr. Mitchell entered, carrying a tablet in one hand, speaking rapidly to his associate about mergers and deadlines. He didn't even glance at Emma. Not once. My jaw tightened. How could someone so close to his own child be so completely blind to her existence? Then something unexpected happened. Emma, syrup-covered fingers in hand, called out softly, "Daddy, do you want some pancakes?" The words barely escaped her lips when he paused mid-sentence. I saw the slightest flicker of recognition, almost disbelief. He looked at her, really looked, and then quickly averted his gaze, returning to his business talk as if he hadn't said anything. Emma's face fell slightly, but she didn't retreat. I motioned for her to keep eating, and she nodded, trying to act like it hadn't hurt. Later that day, while I tidied the kitchen, Emma came running to me, dragging a small chair. "Can you sit here with me?" she asked, pointing to the spot she had set up at the edge of the living room, away from the main table. I sat down without hesitation. We started a game of storytelling, each taking turns to make up a part of a wild adventure involving a brave girl and a clever maid who saved the day. Emma's eyes sparkled, her laughter filling corners of the house that had been empty for years. Then I noticed a stain on her sleeve, faint but suspicious. I crouched down, examining it. "Where did this come from?" I asked softly. She hesitated, fiddling with a loose thread on her dress. I didn't mean to spill it." Her voice trembled, but I sensed more than just clumsiness. Something about her hesitation told me she was hiding how it had really happened, maybe a scolding from her father or a misstep during the morning rush. I didn't press, but I made a mental note to stay even closer, to be both a shield and a friend. That evening, the mansion fell into a rare calm. I helped Emma with her homework, guiding her through math problems she struggled with, listening to her stories about school, and encouraging her every step of the way. She leaned against me at one point, small head resting on my shoulder, and I realized how starved she had been for attention, for someone who genuinely cared. Suddenly, the sound of the front door opening startled us. Mr. Mitchell had returned, earlier than expected. His shadow stretched across the room, sharp and imposing. Emma flinched slightly, and I instinctively moved closer to her, positioning myself between her and the looming figure. He didn't say a word, just surveyed the room. Then, unexpectedly, he walked past us, straight into his office. Not a glance, not a nod, nothing. Emma let out a long, quiet sigh. "I wish," she whispered, almost to herself. "I wish he could see me sometimes." I held her hand, squeezing it gently. "He will," I said, even though I wasn't entirely sure how or when. But I knew this. I wasn't going to let her grow up feeling invisible. I wasn't going to let a life of wealth blind her father to the simple truth that love, attention, and care couldn't be bought. That night, as I tucked Emma into bed, I noticed her clutching a small stuffed rabbit, eyes wide open, restless. "Do you think he'll ever sit with me?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling. I knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I don't know," I admitted, "but for now I will. Every day, I promise." And as I turned off the light and quietly left the room, I realized that every action, every small gesture mattered. Each moment I spent with her was slowly building something stronger than wealth, something her father had never understood, a connection, a bond, a reason for her to feel seen. The mansion was large, intimidating, and cold, but in that small room, at that small bed, hope had taken root. And I would do whatever it took to make sure it grew, no matter how long or difficult the journey ahead. The week began like any other, but something in the mansion felt heavier than usual. I could sense at the moment I stepped inside. The staff moved faster than normal. Whispers bounced off the marble walls, and even the usually calm air seemed charged with tension. Emma, sitting alone at the dining table, didn't look up as I approached. Her tiny hands were folded on the table, her gaze fixed on the plate in front of her, untouched. "Good morning," I said softly, setting down her breakfast. She didn't respond. I knelt beside her chair, careful not to startle her. "It's okay," I whispered. "You don't have to eat alone." She looked at me, with eyes heavy with exhaustion and something I couldn't quite name. Fear, sadness, maybe both. Slowly, she picked up her fork, and I guided her hand, just as I had every morning before. Today, though, the tension in her movements was different, sharper, more cautious. Halfway through breakfast, a sharp crash echoed from the study. My stomach dropped. I didn't need to see Mr. Mitchell to know what it was. His temper had a way of making itself known through slammed doors and shouted words. Emma flinched, her fork clattering against the plate. "Don't worry," I said firmly, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "I'm right here." I heard his footsteps coming down the hallway, fast, heavy, controlled. He entered the room, eyes darting, clearly agitated. "Emma," he barked, his voice sharp, "did you finish your homework?" She nodded quickly, almost fearfully, and he barely glanced at the plate of pancakes, which now lay half-eaten in front of her. I held my breath, waiting for the reprimand that always seemed to come for even the smallest misstep. But today he turned on his heel and left, muttering something about meetings and deadlines. Emma let out a shaky breath. "Why? Why does he always leave?" she whispered, more to herself than to me. "Because he doesn't realize how much he's missing," I said softly. "But you're not alone anymore." After breakfast, I helped her with her schoolwork in the sunroom. She was unusually quiet at first, her small shoulders tense, but gradually she began to open up. She told me stories about her friends, about books she loved, and even about the small adventures she imagined in the mansion when no one was watching. Her laughter was quiet but genuine, and each time it echoed in the grand room, I felt a little of the weight lift from her shoulders. Later, when I was clearing the dishes, I heard muffled sobs coming from her bedroom. I rushed up. Heart pounding, I found her sitting on the floor, hugging her knees, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Emma," I said gently, kneeling beside her. "What's wrong?" I just wish someone would care," she whispered, shaking. I try so hard to be good, but it's like I don't even exist, Em." My chest ached. I pulled her into a tight embrace, feeling the small weight of her body against mine. "I care," I said firmly. "I will always care. No one can take that away from you." We stayed like that for a long while, just breathing, just holding on to each other. And then a loud knock on the bedroom door startled us both. "Emma, dinner is ready," called one of the staff from downstairs. It was a cheerful voice, but the mansion's tension made it feel hollow. She wiped her eyes and stood, still clutching my hand. That evening, as we walked down the grand staircase together, I noticed Mr. Mitchell pacing in the study doorway, watching us silently. His expression was unreadable, but there was a tension in his jaw that hadn't been there before. He didn't say a word, just followed us with his eyes as Emma and I entered the dining room. We sat down, and for the first time, I noticed how lonely the chair across from her looked, empty, untouched, a silent reminder of his absence. Emma glanced at it, her small hand gripping mine under the table. "I won't let you sit here alone anymore," I whispered. "Not ever." Her lips curved into a small, hesitant smile. She began to eat, more confidently than before. I chatted with her, making jokes, asking questions about her day, keeping her mind off the empty chair. For a while it worked. Later that night, after tucking her into bed, I lingered by the door. Her eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling. "Do you think he'll ever sit with me?" she asked quietly. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice steady but soft. "But for now, I will. Every day, I promise. And maybe someday, he'll realize what he's been missing." I left her room quietly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. The mansion felt different now, charged with possibility and tension. Every small action, every moment I spent with her, seemed to ripple through the walls of that house, setting the stage for a confrontation, or maybe a breakthrough. I knew the next week would bring decisions, revelations, and perhaps the first real steps towards something neither of us could have expected. And I promised myself that no matter what, I would be there to make sure Emma was never alone again. The morning was heavy with anticipation. I could feel it the moment I walked into the mansion, the air thick and tense. Emma was already in the dining room, her small fingers tapping nervously on the table. The empty chair across from her seemed almost louder than ever, a silent witness to the years of neglect she had endured. Today, something had to change. I set down her breakfast, scrambled eggs, and toast arranged neatly, and took my seat beside her. She glanced up, eyes wide with hope and uncertainty. "Are you really going to sit with me again?" she asked softly. "Of course," I replied, smiling. "Always." We ate together in quiet companionship, sharing small jokes and stories, the kind that only two people who understood each other could share. But even as we laughed softly, the tension in the house was building. The sound of Mr. Mitchell's steps echoed through the hallway, each one heavier, more deliberate than usual. He entered the room, dressed impeccably as always, but there was a different energy about him today, a restless, almost anxious edge. His eyes scanned the dining table, and for the first time, I noticed something in them: hesitation. Emma's hand trembled slightly as she held her fork. "Daddy," she began, her voice tiny. He paused mid-step, his gaze locking on her. The room went silent, as if time itself was holding its breath. Emma's eyes filled with cautious hope, and I felt my heart tighten. She had waited for this moment every morning for years, never imagining it would actually come. Then, something extraordinary happened. Mr. Mitchell slowly walked toward the table, his usual brisk movements replaced by uncertainty. He stopped behind Emma's chair, his hands resting lightly on the back. "Emma," he said, his voice low, almost unrecognizable. Would you like me to sit?" She nodded, almost in disbelief. I squeezed her hand gently and smiled at her, signaling that it was okay to believe this was real. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, carefully, like someone learning an unfamiliar role. For the first time, he really looked at her, the messy hair, the freckled cheeks, the small smile that was just beginning to appear. He saw her, truly saw her, and I could feel the weight of years of absence pressing into that small moment. Emma hesitated, then took a bite of her food, glancing up at him with wide, cautious eyes. "You want some?" she asked, holding out a piece of toast. He smiled, a genuine, rare smile, and took it. "Yes," he said softly. "I want some." I sat back for a moment, letting them have their moment, but the mansion felt lighter already, as if a long-held shadow had finally lifted. The air was still, peaceful, and charged with something new: connection. Over the next few minutes, conversation flowed. It was simple at first, awkward but real. He asked about her school, her favorite books, even what she wanted for her birthday. Emma laughed softly, the sound ringing brighter than it had in years. Every bite she took, every smile she shared, seemed to chip away at the wall between father and daughter. I noticed small gestures that mattered. The way he adjusted her chair, how he passed her the syrup instead of ignoring her needs, how he leaned in slightly, really listening for the first time. And she responded, leaning forward, speaking freely, her eyes no longer filled with the quiet fear I had come to know so well. Later that day, I watched them from the hallway. Emma was animated, her words tumbling out faster than he could answer, but he listened, engaged, responding with patience I hadn't seen before. I realized then that this simple act, sitting beside her, had changed everything. The years of neglect, the silence, the empty breakfasts, they didn't vanish, but the connection they had been missing had finally begun. That evening, after dinner, I found Emma in her room, tucking her stuffed rabbit beside her pillow. She turned to me, eyes bright with excitement and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't have to thank me," I said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You're the one who let him see you today." She smiled, a true, unburdened smile, and climbed into bed. I left her room quietly, but the mansion no longer felt cold. I knew the hardest part had been done. Emma had been seen, she had been heard, and for the first time, she wasn't alone. And from that day forward, every morning, I watched her eat breakfast with someone finally beside her. Her father, not just present, but there, fully there. And I knew, without a doubt, that the bond we had started to build, her father, her, and even me, would only grow stronger with every shared meal, every conversation, and every small gesture of care. Please like and subscribe for more rich stories like this. Comment below. Also, if you really love this video and want to support the channel directly, you can hit that super thanks button below.